Welcome, everyone. I am absolutely pumped to jump right into today's explainer, mostly because we're unpacking something that affects literally millions of us, yet it gets totally misunderstood all the time. Today, we're taking a deep dive straight into the human brain, guided by a massive study from the prestigious Lancet Journal. We're going to break down the actual biology of anxiety, and we're going to do it using some fun, cartoon-style analogies to make these super complex medical concepts crystal clear and totally on point. Let's get into it. So, tell me if this sounds familiar. Have you ever felt a sudden, massive rush of panic, or just this lingering, heavy sense of dread for absolutely no reason at all? Your heart is racing, your palms are sweaty, but you're, just sitting on your couch watching TV. Imagine you have this highly sensitive, animated smoke detector in your house, but instead of only blaring when there's an actual fire, it goes off because someone burnt a piece of toast, or actually scratch that, it goes off just because you turned the oven on. That is exactly what's happening inside the brain of someone dealing with an anxiety disorder. Now, we really need to draw a line between fear and anxiety because they aren't the same thing. Picture yourself in a cartoon, walking through the woods, and suddenly, boom, you're face to face with a massive, angry grizzly bear. Your heart pounding, the urge to run for your life, that's fear. It's a conscious, life-saving response to a real, right in front of you danger. But anxiety? Anxiety is lying perfectly safe in your bed at night, terrified that a bear might be in those woods tomorrow, or next week, or hey, maybe he's hiding in your closet right now. It's the anticipation of an imagined or future threat. Both are natural, but they operate on totally different timelines. So when does this totally normal survival instinct morph into a medical condition? Well, clinical anxiety disorders kick in when these feelings become completely blown out of proportion to any actual threat. It's like that internal alarm system gets completely jammed in the on position. It lasts for way too long, and most crucially, it actively messes with your normal life. We're talking about disrupting school, your job, your relationships. At that point, it's not keeping you safe anymore. It's practically holding you hostage. Section: The Many Faces of Anxiety Disorders. According to the Lancet research, this malfunctioning alarm doesn't just look one way. There are several core types. You've got separation anxiety, selective mutism, specific phobias, like an intense fear of spiders or heights. Then there's social anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and agoraphobia. And here's a wildly fascinating detail. The data shows the onset for most of these actually happens when we're kids. Things like separation anxiety and specific phobias usually pop up long before adulthood, which actually makes anxiety disorders the earliest of all forms of mental illness. 48% to 68%. That is a massive number. That's the percentage of adults with one anxiety disorder who also meet the criteria for a second concurrent anxiety disorder. Think about that. If you have one malfunctioning alarm in your brain, you are incredibly likely to have another one going off too. This huge overlap makes getting a proper clinical assessment absolutely crucial. Let's shift gears. Section: What is happening inside the brain? Think of the brain's threat circuitry like an animated, high-tech security system. Deep inside, you have the amygdala, which acts like the primary threat detector. It's the thing sniffing out danger. Then you have the hippocampus, which provides context and memory. Finally, there's the medial prefrontal cortex, which is kind of like the rational security manager, trying to evaluate if the threat is actually real. In a brain with an anxiety disorder, functional MRI studies show this whole system becomes hyper-responsive. The circuitry gets way too sensitive, causing the brain to misinterpret totally safe situations as incredibly dangerous. When those brain regions think they've spotted a threat, they blast out one of 4 defensive commands: avoid, freeze, flee, or fight. In a healthy brain, these commands literally save your life. But in an anxiety disorder, it's like the brain's software is glitching. It's constantly spamming the avoid or flee buttons, even when you're just, say, giving a presentation at work or walking down the cereal aisle in a grocery store. All right. Pulling back for a wider view. Section: Facts and Figures of Anxiety. 10% to 14%. That is the 1-year prevalence rate of anxiety disorders in the adult population. To put that into perspective, anywhere from 1 in 10 to 1 in 7 adults will meet the criteria for a clinical anxiety disorder in any given year. That is a staggering amount of people. It basically makes anxiety disorders the most common group of mental illnesses on the entire planet. But it's really important to note that this doesn't affect everyone equally. The data highlights a major gender disparity. Females are actually at a 1.3 to 2.4 times higher risk of experiencing anxiety disorders compared to males. And according to the World Mental Health Surveys, this difference really kicks into high gear during development and becomes super obvious right after adolescence.
And anxiety rarely travels alone, unfortunately. On the mental health side, major depressive disorder is its most frequent companion. Up to 2/3 of adults with anxiety also battle depression. But it's not just in the mind. Look at the physical or somatic disorders. Cardiac disease, thyroid issues, and respiratory diseases like asthma heavily overlap with anxiety. It's crazy. A patient might rush to the ER absolutely certain they're having a heart attack, but it's actually a severe panic attack misfiring those exact same physical alarms.
Okay, time for some good news. Section, Effective Solutions and Treatments. So how do we fix the alarm? First up is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. It's an absolute gold standard treatment. It breaks down into 3 big steps. First, education, literally just understanding what your symptoms are. Second, and this is the really tough but critical one, exposure. Instead of running away, patients safely and slowly approach their fears to create new safety learning pathways in the brain. And third is cognitive restructuring. That means actively challenging and rewriting those catastrophic thoughts. It's quite literally reprogramming that glitchy software we talked about earlier. Now, while psychotherapy like CBT is amazing, it's not our only tool. We generally have 2 main first-line defenses: psychotherapy, which restructures thoughts and behaviors, and pharmacotherapy, which involves medications like SSRIs and SNRIs. Medications work by directly tweaking the brain chemistry inside those threat-responsive circuits. The Lancet points out that both approaches are highly, highly effective. Choosing between them? That should really be a collaborative decision between the patient and their doctor, depending on severity and personal preference. And we know these treatments work because the data proves it over and over. When you look at the effect sizes across different meta-analyses, it's undeniable. There's a clear positive effect in reducing anxiety symptoms across the board. Whether it's CBT for social anxiety or medication for generalized anxiety disorder, the science consistently shows that we absolutely have the power to turn down the volume of that blaring internal alarm. But, and this is a really big but, we have to confront a pretty sobering reality check. Less than 25%, despite having these incredibly effective, scientifically backed treatments, worldwide, fewer than 1/4 of people suffering from anxiety disorders actually get potentially adequate care. That means over 75% of people with a malfunctioning internal alarm are just walking around with the sirens blaring inside their heads, day in and day out, completely without the help they so desperately need. Which brings us to our final point, and probably the most important question of this whole explainer. We've seen the cartoon-like reality of the brain's glitching security system, right? We've looked at the hard data, the biology, and the treatments that actually work. We have the science. So how on earth do we close this massive global treatment gap to help more people get their lives back? It's going to take better detection, better digital health access, and absolutely smashing the stigma so people aren't afraid to speak up. I'll leave you to chew on that. Thank you so much for hanging out with me on this deep dive. Stay curious and keep learning.